Welcome on in, guys. Three bold takes, and again, as we start our off-season prep here, we just got done with the national championship game, and Washington was involved in that game as they finished 14-1 on the year, being ranked second in the country. And this kind of brought up an interesting topic. They had an amazing story this year. Um, Not a lot of people were high on them making the national championship game. Some thought they had playoff aspirations and they could potentially win the Pac 12 and make the playoffs, but nobody anticipated them having the year that they had, right? So, what we want to do here is discuss a couple of teams that could be next year's quote unquote Washington, right? A team that nobody's really going to talk about, that's going to fly under the radar, that has a chance to make the playoffs and make some noise in the playoffs and potentially play for a national championship. So, Chase, I want to pass it off to you first. Let's hear from you, and then we'll round it out with Quinn here.
Dude, this is I was the one that actually came up with this idea because the last two seasons we've seen a TCU team that had a first year head coach and a couple of studs in their offense make it all the way to the national championship game. This year was Washington, another one that went all the way, right, with the studs and some veteran leadership, a great coach. My 2024 TCU Washington like team that could make the playoffs and maybe make a Cinderella run at the national championship is the Utah Utes. I choose Utah. They're moving to the Big 12. Let's not forget that they're moving to the Big 12. So I think right then and there, they are probably contending for that spot as a Big 12 champion at the end of the year, which solidifies them in this new round of the 12-team playoff. We can't forget that. So they would automatically have a top four seed if they win the conference. Even if they don't, being a top 12 team helps them, and a good record helps them in a weak Big 12. Because you gotta remember, Texas, Oklahoma are gone. You're adding Colorado, Arizona, but you also had a lot of group of five teams like Cincinnati, BYU, UCF that joined this past year that kind of were middle of the road packs. Now, Utah this season had a great season. They finished 8-5, and that's Chase. Yes, but they did that all on the back of their defense more than they did with their offense. Cam Rising was hurt the whole year, already announced that he's coming back. And then Coach Dillingham has been one of the top coaches in college football the last few years since the start of Cam Rising, getting them to Rose Bowls, winning Pac 12 championships. Their schedule next year: Southern Utah, Baylor. Baylor might be a tough one, but Baylor didn't have a great season this year. Utah State, Arizona State, Colorado, Houston, Oklahoma State, UCF, Arizona, BYU, TCU, and Iowa State. I'm seeing a loss, and if I'm being generous, maybe two losses. If I'm being generous, Oklahoma State is the worst one you play on this team. TCU, Iowa State had down seasons this year. Well, Iowa State ended easier or did better, but they didn't look so hot at points. Baylor, David Aranda is really close to being fired, and if he has another down year this year, will be fired. And then you have Arizona. Arizona could be that second loss, but you play them at home. So Cam Rising back in the seat of Utah football. Coach Dillingham back, having some studs on that team. Utah could be the next Washington. Could be in the playoffs. Definitely with the 12-team playoff, I could see them in that top eight and then making a run of the national championship. But even if they're not in the top eight and they win the conference, then they're a top four seed anyway. And I believe that they would get a bye off the first week or whoever, and then they would play from there. So I've got Utah for mine, Quinn. How about you?
I don't hate Utah making a run. The one issue I have with picking Utah is more the semantics of picking Utah. So for me, TCU was like maybe sixth or seventh in projected Big 12 finish going into the season when they went on to win the or not win it, but play for the national title. And Washington was in. They weren't way out of the picture, but they were significantly slotted under USC and Oregon. It was who's going to win USC and Oregon, and then like here's a couple teams who could mess it up, and Washington was in that bunch. For me, Utah's the clear favorite for the Big 12 next year. You've got an experienced head coach in Whittingham. You've got a 17th year starting quarterback in Cam Rising. Like, you've got the best setup you could have to win that conference. That's my only issue with that. It's not that I don't hate it. It's just that I think they're a little too heavy of a favorite. My choice resides in the ACC. It's a team that, when you look at, do I think they have the roster going into next year to be able to make a shocking run? Because people aren't going to give them the credit they probably should preseason. And that's the Miami Hurricanes. I think Miami will have a really talented roster next year. And when you look at ACC play, what you got to do? You got to get past Clemson and Florida State. That's it. And I think from a talent perspective, they're not going to be that far behind those two teams. So if you win the ACC, you beat your rival in Florida State. I don't even know if they're playing Clemson or not. I haven't looked into their schedule yet. But if you beat Florida State in a rivalry game, you've automatically pretty much sealed your spot in the ACC title game. You win that, you're one of the 4 buys because you're a conference champion. And then you have the roster to make it believable to me that you could win your way to the national title. And that's my other big issue with Utah, is I don't know if they'll have the dogs to hang when they've got to play PO Texas, who lost 1 game in the SEC, so they had to go through the wild cards to get there, or Alabama or whoever is the SEC team who's going to be probably a 3 best teams in the country, but isn't one of the 4 getting a bye week. That would be my concern for a team like Utah. Whereas when you look at Miami, I think they'll actually have the roster to hang in a game like that.
I have their schedule here, Quinn, if you'd like me to give it to you.
Yeah, give it to me.
All right, they play Florida to start the season.
Win.
Florida A&M, Ball State, USF, at Cal, at Georgia Tech, at Louisville, Duke, then Florida State, then Virginia Tech, then Wake Forest, and then at Syracuse to finish off the season.
Okay, who are you favoring over them other than Florida State?
Yeah, you don't. Duke's not going to be the same team as they were
No.
this year. Virginia Tech had a good end to the season, but I'm still not saying Virginia Tech. Yeah, it might only be Florida. Well, potentially Louisville.
Yeah, but even then, I don't think you replicate the season you had this year back-to-back years at Louisville.
Probably not.
And I would say Miami's going to be a more talented roster. Miami was super young this year, by the way. So yeah, Miami's my choice for a team that, like, way too early team to be watching for 2024.
I love that pick, Quinn. That was going to be my number 1 pick, but lucky enough for me, I came with 2, which I figured out while you guys were talking. My number 1 team to watch out for in 2024, and they're not in a conference, and that's Notre Dame. Now, finished the year 10-3 in 2023. Sam Hartman did not pan out the way that people anticipated him to. But guess what? Another transfer quarterback's coming in, Riley Leonard. You remember that quarterback that played for Duke, that was very, very good at Duke, by the way? Yeah, Quinn, I see the Birmingham Bowl sweatshirt there representing. But not only do they have Riley Leonard coming, they also have Chris Mitchell, from Florida International, who led Conference USA in receiving yards last year. That's a big pickup, right? To give Riley Leonard some help on the outside, which Notre Dame did not have in 2023 to help out Sam Hartman hardly at all. So bless him for that. But you also get Bo Collins from Clemson. Now, that's a huge addition for Notre Dame coming from a team like Clemson. And Marcus Freeman, ever since he took the reins, has gotten better and better. Like I mentioned, you've got 10 wins in 2023, 2022, 9-4, and then that was when he was hired. So look at 2024 in next year's schedule. They really only have 2 really tough games, and that's at Texas A&M to open up the season. That's a big game. Then they play Florida State at home. Now, they do finish out with USC on the road at USC. That could potentially be a tough game, but we don't know what USC is necessarily going to look like next year. So for the sake of argument here, I'm just gonna talk about Texas A&M and Florida State. Having Florida State at home is huge, right? That's a game I want to say ACC play, even though Notre Dame's not in the ACC in football. They are in every other sport. It's the dumbest thing in the history of college football. I think we all understand that and believe that. Um, that's going to be a great game. But opening up at Texas A&M. Now, keep in mind, first year with a new head coach over at A&M, and this is a home game against Notre Dame. This is going to be a huge game. A lot of pressure that's going to be built on this game for Texas A&M. I would not be surprised if they drop that. So there is a legitimate chance that Notre Dame could go undefeated next year in the regular season, or at least one loss. And we know that with the 12-team playoffs, it's the 12 highest-ranked teams. Your conference champions get a bye, and then your group of 5 highest-ranked conference champion gets an automatic bid as well. So I definitely think that Notre Dame could finish the season in that top 12, in that conversation to make the playoffs and make some noise next year.
Real quick, I just want to point something out. Let's say Notre Dame, because I like that pick. Let's say they go undefeated. Let's say they beat Florida State, they beat Texas A&M, they beat USC. You realize they're still not going to get a bye. It's time to join a conference. Like, I get the tradition, I get it. And let's be honest about the other independent teams. They're not the caliber of team Notre Dame is. Notre Dame is a Power 5 football team that just happens to not be in a Power 5 conference. But it's time to get on board with one, because that's going to put you at a draft. You could be the best team in football, unquestionably, and still not get a bye in the first round because you're not playing in a conference.
That is a very good point in the 12-team playoff. You know, Quinn mentioned about mine, about being maybe that's too easy of a pick. Wouldn't you say that about Notre Dame as well, though? Because Notre Dame's always in the upper echelon of competitors every season.
What I'll say about Notre Dame, though, is we've been watching them now since '98. They've played in 9 major postseason bowl games, BCS and CFP era. They've won 0.
Right.
So to say that they're going to make a title game is pretty bold to me, because they have not shown that they can win when it matters at the end of the year.
But that was under the old regime. So
It's been under 3 different regimes, technically.
That's true. So very interesting there. Guys, that has been a short snippet here of who we think could be a sleeper team next year, sort of like Washington was this year. Appreciate you guys watching. I'm Freddie. I'm joined by Chase and Quinn. It's been 3 bold takes. We'll see you next time.